The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves, whom you may know as being responsible for the Cloverfield series and recent Planet of the Apes releases among other things, is the latest iteration of the Caped Crusader and his adventures in a post-Burton and Frank Miller style, succeeding Affleck's brooding and tormented direct Miller-inspired adaptation on the character, as seen in Zack Snyder's much-maligned Batman vs Superman. Jesus Christ, 6 years! Oh my. The film sports a star-studded cast, with Robert Pattinson assuming the titular role this time round, Zoe Kravitz portraying the cat burglar Selina Kyle, and Jeffrey Wright as the noble and unwaveringly loyal Lieutenant Gordon, as they each attempt to make the poisonous, vitamin D deprived city of Gotham a safer place, all while Paul Dano emerges as a sinister new Zodiac killer-inspired keyboard warrior calling himself the Riddler and hatches a sinister plot during a rather long Halloween. See what I did there? To say that anticipation for this film's release in online spaces has been palpable might just be an understatement. Not since Nolan's trilogy, which concluded nearly a decade ago, have we truly been able to enjoy a high-quality live-action adaptation of Bob Kane and Bill Finger's comic book Titan, and so you can understand why Matt Reeves' seemingly cerebral and uncompromisingly gritty murder mystery take on this lore, on this character, on this world, would cause such a degree of excitement and hope that the heights of the Nolan trilogy would once again be reached, or at the very least touched. I finally saw the film yesterday, almost 1 week since its release here in the UK, and I certainly have some things to say about it. Is it as good as its online critical and fanboy reception might suggest, and where does it find itself placed in the grand scope of live-action Batman interpretations? Well, I certainly enjoyed Matt Reeves' film, although I don't think I can sit here in good faith and tell you that I loved it. I'm delighted that the film has fulfilled or even surpassed the expectations in the eyes of the majority of the fanbase, but it would be wrong of me to tell you that it's the best film ever made purely to appease the masses in hopes of gaining some more traction to this channel. As a lifelong Batman fan myself, there was a certain moment in this film where I felt a degree of disappointment as I stopped myself during one of the many beautifully crafted shots in the third act. Seriously, this film is quite breathtaking from a visual standpoint, but I stopped myself and I asked, what exactly am I feeling right now, or what have I been feeling? And regrettably, I came to the conclusion that it wasn't very much. One thing I certainly did feel, in fact, the only thing that I felt that I would consider to be unique or noteworthy that can be attributed to this film, and indeed this story of Batman, is how intimidating Pattinson is in the role of the Dark Knight, or Vengeance as he and Gotham's underbelly refer to him as, at this early stage of his tenure as nighttime janitor in the dirtiest cesspool ever put to screen. Perhaps we could have expected this given Pattinson's remarkable acting range that he has showcased throughout a rather ambitious career thus far. Of course, it's also noteworthy that he has in fact displayed an ability to step into the shoes of a tortured soul who feels a great burden in his day-to-day life to the extent that he forces himself into relative isolation and solitude. Though his performance in The Batman is buoyed by a more talented director this time around, and also by the fact that
it's a man.
Batman's entrance was, in my opinion, one of the highlights of the film, especially from an emotional standpoint. His opening monologue is chilling to say the least, and teases his first appearance beautifully, so that then the moment that he does show up is rife with tension and, for lack of a better term, badassery. Because, let me tell you, he's vengeful by name, and he's definitely vengeful by his actions. And when he's not beating people up to a pulp, he feels like he could snap at any second and clear out a room at will, as he towers over the other on-screen characters and stiffly but predatorily walks around, prowling crime scenes as if he owns the place, while officers keep their eyes trained on him because they don't have any reason to trust him at this point, and some of them certainly fear him. He's like the Terminator when he's in this suit, and I couldn't be happier with that, to be honest. Definitely the most intimidating live-action portrayal of the character that we've ever seen. There are a fair few scenes in this film in which we get to see Batman not only be a forceful vigilante, but also an intelligent one. One or two scenes are reminiscent of something from the Arkham game series in which Batman pieces together a crime scene incrementally in Sherlock-esque fashion, sometimes relying on impressive mental gymnastic ability, and other times using some nifty gadgets and tech in the Batcave. Pattinson's on-screen chemistry with Zoe Kravitz's Selina Kyle is excellent, as was her performance. They take the character in some very interesting and, shall we say, modern directions that were unexpected and certainly appreciated. You really get the impression that she and Bruce have something to learn from one another, and you understand why they are drawn to each other in the way that they are, helping each other to complete their respective character arcs in a substantial fashion which will shape their futures as they become the characters that we know and love today. The relationship between Batman and Lieutenant Gordon, is also a good one. You get a sense that this city is truly corrupt to its core, and that in some cases it really feels like it's these two against the rest of the world, learning to trust each other and develop that relationship that we know from other Batman-related media is so integral to this mythos. Performance-wise, I have few complaints. As well as the standout performances I've already discussed, Colin Farrell, whose name for some reason I always confuse with Colin Firth, which would be quite something. I mean, the bloke has decent acting range, I would suggest, but I don't know if he could pull this off. But anyway, yes, Colin Farrell as the Penguin is absolutely having a great time, and is every bit as sleazy and dishonourable as you might expect, though he does feature in one of my least favourite sequences during the film where you just couldn't really see what was going on. There's some beautiful, breathtaking shot composition present here, and the cinematography is stunning throughout, but sometimes the clarity of the image is forgone, and I suspect this is deliberate, for thematic visual meaning. There's a conscious effort from Reeves to have much of the mise-en-scène be out of focus in any given shot, allowing you to see only one small central section of the frame, whilst the edges are intensely out of focus, to inflict, I think, a sense of isolation and mistrust in the audience, as any given direction could see a potential threat in this dangerous setting. It's a clever storytelling device, but I was distracted by the fact that I couldn't see what the hell was going on due to the focus issues and the heavy rain present throughout the whole film. Torrential downpour that makes sense when you consider that they shot a chunk of this film not too far from me in the monsoon capital of the world that is Glasgow, Scotland. Speaking of the locations in the film, I really appreciated the effort to make what is surely as perfect a Gotham City as can possibly be achieved. Where the Nolan-verse felt like it could have taken place in any of the big modern US cities, this feels like it's ripped straight out of the comics, or the animated series, or even out of the Arkham games, specifically Arkham Knight, the final installment. Every corner of the city is dangerous, you really get that impression, and it feels like a place devoid of all hope. Ultimately, it feels like a city on its knees, to the point where you do have to hold your hands up and say, yep, I understand how this toxic cocktail churned out some of the horrible people that it has, and it feels totally believable that someone with all the fortune and privilege of Bruce Wayne might give that up in favour of a life in which he desperately tries to spare other innocents from suffering the same pain that he has in his traumatic childhood. My main issues with the film, and the few things that really got in the way of me staking its claim as a truly great film, would be a bit of a lacklustre and overly prolonged finish, as well as what I consider to be a rare miss from Paul Dano as the main antagonist. Though I'm certain that many of my gripes with the character were intentional, and I hold my hands up to say that the character just didn't really work for me, but this is very much a subjective opinion, as most of film criticism is, and so it might have worked for you, and if it did, I'm very happy. But I'll discuss my issues with his character in greater detail during a spoiler discussion, which I'm planning to release in the near future. So, if you would consider subscribing, then I'd be over the moon. There's also a certain scene near the end of the film that I absolutely loathed, if I'm honest. It's something that feels extremely out of place and really put the nail in the coffin that led me to leave the cinema feeling somewhat disappointed with the film, despite what I have to say was a first act that I think wholly rivaled that of any of Nolan's trilogy. What I loved so much about the Batman in the first half to two-thirds was how personal this story was, and how relatively small scale it felt. It was a true Batman and Bruce Wayne story which was focused and thought-provoking to a level that few comic book films are actually capable of. However, as the film gets to its third act, it blows the stakes sky high, widening the scale of the conflict and taking away so much of that focus and that personal threat that I was really enjoying. And it left me thinking that this film may have been better if they had shaved a lot of the second half off. I liked the Batman, I would even say that I loved the first half of it, and would hold it alongside the Nolan trilogy as some of my favourite Batman-related media. I would say that it features my favourite score to a Batman film, which is absolutely no small feat given the fact that we've had musical legends like Danny Elfman and Hans Zimmer composing award-winning, timeless scores. But for my taste, the predatory and threatening score that Giacchino provides to this film enhances the atmosphere tenfold and brings a dramatic quality to some scenes which would not really work were the music not there to back it up. And so, for that reason, I feel I have to say that it did its job. The main theme stuck with me after leaving the theatre for quite some time as well, which is always a good sign. I know some people are unhappy with the portrayal of Bruce Wayne by Pattinson as this mopey man who never smiles. For me, this can be answered by the consideration of the film's setting during his life. He's been doing this exhausting nocturnal routine for just 2 years at this point, and I'm sure he gets next to no sleep, and I wouldn't smile either if that were me, to be honest. No, but on a serious note, one of the interesting things that sets Batman apart from other heroes, at least in my view, is the idea that Batman is his true form of expression and his true identity, while Bruce Wayne is in fact the mask. At this early stage in his career, Bruce hasn't learned to put on that public persona yet, or that performance if you'd prefer, so it doesn't really bother me that he is a bit like Edward Cullen if he bulked up a bit and lost everyone that he loved. So, to leave you with my closing thoughts, even with some incredible performances across the board, some breathtaking cinematography, as I've lauded several times throughout this video, and an absolute beast of a score driving it all forward, I think I could have done with the Batman finishing at a certain point during the third act and cutting a good chunk of it out. For me, the Batman did not reach its admittedly absurd stratospheric level of hype, but it was a very good film, which is worthy of succeeding the Nolanverse, and is certainly better than the DCEU offerings that we've received in the last decade. Sure, it isn't my favourite film to be released in recent times, but I'd very much be interested in seeing future installments of a new series of films or TV shows set in this world, and so I was pleasantly surprised at the time of creating this video to discover that there are some projects currently in development which will continue to tell the story of some of these wonderful characters. I've tried to be as fair as possible in my judgment of this film. I understand that it's loved by so many people, and again, I'm delighted for that. I did enjoy the film, but I don't think I was madly in love with it as others seem to be. But let me know what you thought in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and please join me in the near future for my spoiler discussion. Thank you guys.